Hi guys, so we've got a great episode of the 2030 School today, and we have Scott Smith, creator of the Daily Boost, which is an awesome podcast giving daily motivational and fun and cool stories to motivate you throughout the day. So in this episode we talk about everything about podcasting. What is the industry like? How does Scott get started with podcasting? What are the challenges and how do you grow and improve in podcasts? So if you are looking to start a podcast, this is the guy that you want to speak to. He has done thousands of podcasts. So check it out in this episode and I hope you enjoy it. And here we have Scott Smith. Hi Scott, it's great to have you here. You started this back in 2006.
Yeah, this podcast was 2006. I started before that, December 28th of 2004. It was right before the new year when I technically discovered podcasting, and it had really just become first-time mainstream in November of 2004. A few events happened. There was the RSS feed had got the enclosure going to it, which is what podcasts use. New York Times, USA Today had all done an article on it. So when I say mainstream, I'm hesitating because it wasn't mainstream. But it was the first time that the mainstream publication said, hey, there's this thing called a podcast. I happened to spot it. It was just one of those days. I mean, a lot of people ask me, how do you find what you want to do? And I had been looking for a way to kind of get my message out there. I had been doing some fitness work and had been doing it in gyms and training and things like that. And I'd been looking for it, and I couldn't figure it out. I didn't want to write a book. I didn't know how to do it. And I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know what that was. And so I was looking for the vehicle. And being a longtime broadcaster, as soon as I saw podcasting, my first thought was, pod what? But I got it that minute. I remember walking out to my wife in the living room. I said, honey, I found the vehicle. It's podcasting. And she said, pod what? And that was it. I saw it, I took off running, and I think it took me 3 months to get it going. I'd already been working on some stuff for radio, and I just kind of took the radio stuff and turned it into the podcast and launched it, and the rest is history. We haven't stopped. That was now, 2005. Yeah, it was off and running, man.
Do you think, are you one of the people that has done the most number of podcasts?
Yeah. I mean, the Daily Boost has now done, we're in 4,100 now published episodes, I think, over the years. It's been so long now, it's like, I'm pretty sure I messed up somewhere along the way, the count, but it's close. But, you have to think about a couple other things as well. And that is, I've had multiple podcasts over the years. I run membership sites over the years as well with podcasts. So while I've done like 4,127 podcasts that are now published, although I don't release them all now, it's way too many. I also do the membership version of it. So for years, I would do a public version and a membership version. So it's kind of like, in some cases, double. And then for about 6 years straight, because of my membership site, I actually produced 3 more podcasts. And I did them every day. I had 3 daily podcasts plus a weekly podcast. So I did 16 podcasts a week. So I am somewhere in excess of, I think of these days, I stopped counting at 10,000. I'm probably over 11,000 by now of total produced podcasts on my own. And yeah, just endlessly every single day going at it. I gave that up after 6 years. I said, boy, 3 podcasts a day is way too much, so I stopped. But it was good practice.
And so here we are doing another one today.
Yeah.
So how do you do it every day consistently? How do you get the ideas for all of the podcasts?
Probably the biggest question I get. Almost anybody who wants to do a podcast or write a blog or really do anything, it's creativity. It's coming up with the ideas and how do you do that? And really, ultimately, the best way I can describe this is I learned this trick when I was in radio. I started out in radio at 18 years old and played the radio game for a long time. I actually got out of radio full time when I turned 40. It didn't suit me anymore. And that was shortly before I started this thing. And I just knew that it wasn't for me. But the way a radio person gets ideas, when you think about it, I was doing music radio, doing top 40 radio for a long time. I had to do 4 to 5 hours a day on the air. I did morning shows, and it's very topical. It's all about the community. And there's no possible way to prep a 4-hour show. You just can't do it. I mean, you can, but you can't write it out. And so what you learn to do is pay attention. You learn to pick up on conversations. You learn to remember things. You learn to watch TV. When you're driving down the road, you pick up on stuff. So that's what I do today. I have learned basically in every single part of my life all day. In fact, right here, I've made notes already. Talking to you, something has come to my mind and I capture the moment. I use Asana. It's a to-do program. I capture it right then. I save the idea, and by the end of the week, I have 20 or 30 ideas. If I'm in a conversation, a coaching call with somebody, I capture the idea, and I just capture whatever it happens to be, And that becomes a starting point for the podcast. There is brilliance in everybody's day. I guess probably the deeper answer is to learn to be very self-aware of where you are and pay attention to the interactions that are happening, the complexities happening in your day-to-day life. And that's what I do in my world, because I'm always trying to make things a little easier for people and, kind of a life hack, if you will. And so I'm looking at it and going, okay, well, that didn't work. This did. But I grab the idea and I go, and it's endless. It's absolutely endless. I mean, you could right now say, hey, Scott, let's do a podcast. And I could pull an idea right out of my head this instant and go do 15 or 20 or 30 minutes on it. And even another step, because I've done so many of them now, I know the structure of storyline. I know how to keep people engaged in a podcast. You could give me 5 topics and I'll say, okay, let's go for 5 hours and I'll just do it. It's crazy, but that's where the ideas come from. So then I got off track there a little bit, but ultimately pay attention to your day. Like right now, I will at some point when talking to you, you're in China. I'm in near Daytona Beach. I'll probably take a screenshot of this picture and I will just tuck it away and it will show up on my Facebook feed and it'll probably show up as a little part of my podcast, not the entire podcast. But if I wanted to, I could take this whole experience and then spin it into this dude that's over in China working with students. And I could find a lesson in that probably by pulling from the first or second podcast you did and take a little bit of their storyline and what connected with me and then spin my own thing into it. Make sense?
That's an amazing skill to have, just to have these kind of ideas and be able to go with it for such a long time. But you said something there about how to get people engaged in the podcast, like keep people engaged. So I'm starting this podcast. So I'm interested to ask, how do you keep people engaged in a podcast?
That's a big question, but and there are a lot of ways to do it. But we probably could break that down a little bit more, because what you're really trying to do is get listenership and get consumption. Our consumption is I think we're at like 94%. And what that means is that people listen to 94% of the podcast, and that's by design. So first and foremost, when you do it, you have to understand a couple of things. There's 2 factors going on with a podcast here, and really with anything, is human nature. People will say they want the education. They'll say they want to know. They'll want to take notes about it, and we all do. But what they really want to do is be entertained. They really want to keep their mindset on something. They want structure that allows them to flow through whatever they're learning. This is how, you're in education, you understand how structure works and all that. So that's how you do it. You build first and foremost, you come in with a premise for the podcast. You're going to grab people's attention and you're going to entertain them not the way I do it, but the way you do it. And then you're going to slowly slide into the content and you're going to take them through in a very predictable manner. And, one of the things, because people can't focus very much these days, and podcasts are very passive. People are always doing something else when they're listening to a podcast. So if you don't do something to maintain their attention throughout the podcast, then you're going to lose them. That's all there is to it. So the thing I've done, if you listen to my show, you will hear that there's certain benchmarks, some crutches, if you will, built into my show. The music, the theme music, the format generally I follow on the show is all predictable. So you always know what you're going to get, with some minor changes. My energy level is always predictable. My sense of humor is always, it's going to be there. You don't know what you're going to get. I'm going to fall into the show at a certain time. I'm going to follow a format. Toward the end of my show that I'm going to take you kind of into learning mode for about 30 seconds and then bring you back out of it. So I'm setting an expectation and delivering on that expectation. I just unloaded about a master class of engagement on you there, but ultimately it comes down to, either people are interested or they're not. And just because they found you, and that's the first step, is getting them interested in finding you, that title that you have. And the second step is to just keep that engagement the entire time. And they're not listening. They can read a book and get the content. They're listening to you because you're going to extract the information that they need, and they like how you do it. Make sense?
Yeah, it's amazing. And then you must always be learning from your past episodes and then seeing what works and then improving, right? Is that what?
Yeah, to some extent. You learn. I mean, I hear things I do all the time that I could be better. Honestly, because I've done it for so long now, I've iterated this podcast, 50 times now. All still basically the same, but I make minor changes. And, the podcast as it is today, actually in the past few weeks, couple of months, is actually closer to what it was maybe 15 years ago. A lot better, a lot more polished, a lot more in-depth in what I do because I've learned more. But what happened was when podcasting came out in about 2012, was it 12, I think? Serial the first really big podcast. It might have been 2014. That was the one that was the big podcast hit. And everybody started listening. They found podcasts. They loved it. And then everybody started teaching podcasts, and everybody started copying everybody and making a podcast. This is how we're supposed to do it. Well, we got 4 million podcasts, and I'm in the top 1%. I don't do it like anybody else does. Now, the reason I say that is because ultimately, Henry Ford, I don't know if Henry Ford actually said this, but, when he was building his cars, his Model Ts and everything, he said, if I listened to what anybody else said, I would have built a faster horse. I wouldn't have built a car. Steve Jobs at Apple was the same way. If you ask people what they want, they will not tell you. They'll tell you what they know today. They won't tell you what they don't know what they want. And I can tell you in my podcast, I never ask anybody what they want. Because when they do, everything they come back with is their current issue today, their current problem today, and that's not why they listen to me. They listen to me because I take charge and I decide what it's going to be, and I give them the program, and I create it. I make the environment for them to come into, and I decide what it's going to be. So I am decidedly different than every other podcast out there in how I deliver my format, and yet we go, I think we're number 32 in self-help right now. I could be top 20 really fast. I don't really try. As long as you're in the top, 10 or 20, you're fine. And but we're that high, and yet I'm doing something fundamentally different than everybody else is. It's working.
Well, I've got so many questions that I want to ask.
Oh, okay, I'll try to keep it tighter so you can get your questions in.
No, it's good. So, how do you understand about your listeners? Like, what do you know about them, and how do you understand them?
Well, the first,
the
first key, this is a kind of a business question, but it really is a life question. But certainly in business, we do this all the time. You come down to, you got to know who you're talking to. You got to know. And you have to know exactly what their challenges are. You kind of got to get inside their head. And in my world, in the personal development world, and which is part of what I do, and then we have the business side as well. But in the personal development side, it's always going to be the same. They're going to want to set goals. They're going to be happy. They're going to want to know what their purpose is in life. They're going to know how not to procrastinate, and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of the surface level. Underneath that, you've got, really life is getting in the way. You got relationships that are causing issues. I had a Facebook post today from one of my guys who said, because I mentioned that I live a joyful life and not a happy life. I'm happy in what I do, but happiness is outcome based. And so sometimes I won't be happy, depending on how things work. So I choose to be joyful. And the joyful nature comes from a self-awareness of how my mind works and what makes me joyful throughout the course of the day, and I can choose that path. So that's the underlying tone of understanding people. So number one, I know my demographic. My demographic is going to be, it's wide. I mean, personal development is very wide, but ultimately the sweet spot for my type of people is going to be about 38 years old. It's going to be a female, about 72% female. So I know that. And I can extract psychographic information from that. I can pretty well figure at that age what they're going through. Do they have kids? Are they going off to college? What's happening? And then I choose, because people will choose you. So the first thing is you dive deeply, and probably the best advice I can give you is really decide who you're talking to in your podcast and think through what their life is like today. And what are they going through today? And give them that information today in a way they can relate to it. And then listen to them, not listen to them in terms of them telling you what they want, but in a sense that that they will just express how their life is going. Let me share one thing with you. This is interesting. You'll like this. I started a Facebook group recently. It's open. It's facebook.com/group/Daily Boost Podcast. It's private. You got to ask to come in, but anybody can come in. And I asked 3 questions coming into that group. And the 3 questions are, how long have you listened? What do you expect to get from the group? And finally, what's your big ass goal? What do you really want to accomplish? Kind of generic questions. There's nothing really to it. And some people won't answer the question. So I know if you don't answer my question, which is about 3 or 4% of the people coming in the door, they don't answer the question, you don't get in my group. And I will decline and decline. I've declined people 10 times until they finally answer the questions. They're doing it my way when they come in. So I'm simply saying it's my group. It's my people. It's my community. It's where we hang out together. And if you can't obey the first rule, you're not coming in. I have now set up a litmus test for people, and they'll do it or they won't. But here's why I really do that. These 3 questions are interesting. I'm not asking them what they think other than, hey, what are you doing here? Real, regular people who are your core audience. If you just present it like that, they'll just give you an answer. Oh, I was listening. You got me kind of excited, and I really have this goal. I'm not really happy, and I want to figure that out. They'll just give you an answer, an honest answer. That's gold for me. So I didn't ask them, hey, so what are your goals? I just said, what's up? And they will give you an honest answer. If you pay attention to your honest answers, honest feedback you get when people aren't thinking about, trying to get something from you or ask you a question, gold, man. Long answer to how to choose your audience, but essentially choose the people that are most likely to listen to you and that you most likely will enjoy being involved with, and you'll love the day every day when you do that.
Why do you think it's more women than men?
In my world, personal development does that anyway. For whatever reason, it's a softer art, softer science. It's not a logical kind of thing. It's more emotional. It's more feely, touchy, that kind of stuff. Ultimately, it's all about controlling your feelings and getting down to the logical side of how we live. But women, just uniformly across the board, are going to be a fan of personal development. Now, a lot of guys too, a ton of guys. Obviously, 30% are guys, but it's always been that way. And I can tell you, the demographic and the psychographic plays out across the board. And anybody who wants to, for instance, advertise on my show, they're looking for those people. They always show up. So that's it. And you're going to find that with anything. Your audience is going to be decidedly younger and going to be I don't know what's going to, I don't know. You probably don't know either. I don't know if it's going to be male or female, but it's going to be a mix of one or the other, for sure.
So for our platform, China Admissions, it's pretty much very close. Male, female, slightly more males are interested in studying in China. So it's about 55% males and 45% female.
45, 50%. Basically, you're 50-50 is what it amounts to. And I would expect that because you're gathering around a core subject. Admissions, China, right? It's kind of a core subject. That's not going to be a gender-based kind of thing. That's going to be something that's more interest-based. In my world, I'm kind of life. It's life. It's going to be that kind of thing. And so I would expect yours to be very specific. And that's the key here too, because when we're trying to help people, really what we're doing is solving a problem. And so we're going to choose our problem. And whatever that happens to be. In your case, it may be, admissions. How do you get in? How does this work, right? Educating them about that. You're choosing a problem to solve. So you're not necessarily choosing a demographic. You're choosing a person who has this challenge and is seeking a solution. And that's going to name your demographic. And I would guess, if you had come to me and said, hey, who do you think my demographic is? I would have gone right down the middle and say it's subject-based. And then let's figure it out from there.
Yeah, because that's really important, right? To understand the audience when you're making a podcast so you know how to speak to them directly.
Yeah, because podcasting is the most intimate medium that you can have. It's an earbud, man. You have earbuds in right now. I can see them. And an earbud's inside your body. It's resonating. The reason people can hear you is because your voice is resonating through your bones into your earbuds, and that's why I can hear you. And so it's so intimate. People don't do that with any other medium. And so it's that important to talk directly to them. It's a niched market. People, the people say to me all the time, and I pay a lot of attention to it, as boisterous as I can be and upbeat and excited, the whole thing, they say, man, it's like you're sitting next to my ear talking to me. And I know that. And I program that way. And I do that. You've heard me whisper into the microphone. But I actually do my audio processing to give it that big round feel that sounds like I'm just right in your head. And I do that on purpose because I know that's how they're listening. Very few people are listening on a speaker in a car. Smart speakers are getting a little bit more popular, but that's kind of leveled off now. People don't do it. They put their headphones in and listen to a podcast that way. So that's why you need to talk to them directly, because you are inside their head, legitimately are.
So the reason that I started listening is because I thought that I want to learn and improve and I want to reach bigger goals. And so I was looking for inspiration that could take me to the next level. And I think that it's really important how you think in terms of how you can create and how you can achieve things. So that's why I wanted to try and find some more sources of content to get to the next level. Yeah, is that kind of similar to most of your audience? Or?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, they're different. It's a journey. Listen, personal development is a journey we all go through. It's kind of a seasonal thing. You run into issues in your life where life gets difficult. Transitions, in and out of college, maybe you get married, maybe you got kids, you're transitioning, so you need to learn, right? And then you have to have, interpersonal relationships and how to negotiate for a job and all that stuff. We have to learn that stuff. So anybody who's even the least bit ambitious is going to look for it. Anybody who wants to be happy is going to look for it. And yeah, so that's what you do. So you find that audience who's out there seeking that, but ultimately they need something to kind of bite into that they can actually do, which is what I do. So I'm there, and the stated goal of my podcast is essentially understanding that, we're upbeat, we're positive, but we also understand that you need to get up and move and do things, and that when you do, likely you're going to run into something that's going to stop you and going to frustrate you. And I just accept that. A lot of people don't understand that with me. They say you should have a really positive attitude about everything. I said, well, what's not positive about that? Because you are going to run into things. We all run into difficulties. So, when I go after it like that, yes, that's kind of the first level coming in the door where I meet people there, and they're trying to find happiness, joyfulness. They're trying just to find their way, their purpose in life. Some are trying to figure out how to run a podcast. I get a lot of those people because they see what I do and they want to learn. So they come in, they pay attention to it. But there's another step after that. And that's where I end up making my money ultimately, because it's when people listen to what I have to say, listen to my wisdom, listen to the nuggets I give them and go, this makes sense, but how does that work? And then they step into more of a personal relationship with me, and I take them up through my business funnels. And some of them are very high-end clients and business clients, and I work with them. Some of them are very much, I don't want to say at the bottom end, but they're at the bottom of my funnel, and they're still figuring stuff out. But that's how you work. That's how everybody on your podcast will do this. You will bring people in, you'll do an interview, somebody will hear what I'm talking about today. It's going to send them down a path. And so this voyage of discovery, this interest that they've learned is going to spur something in their mind, and then their thoughts and their actions will take them where they want to go. And that's where I step in usually to help people get there.
How does the monetization work for your podcast? And what's the business model? You mentioned about the funnels.
Yeah, I probably have, I don't know exactly, 5 or 6 revenue streams, I guess. But, when we started out, I started out really pure. Now I'm a radio guy. I came from radio, came from advertising, came from marketing, all that stuff. And that was my early history. And so I knew instantly how to make money out of it. Now, in the early days in podcasting, you couldn't run an ad on a podcast. I did. I got in trouble, but I did it anyway. So my initial model was the freemium model, which is where I ran a podcast a week for free. And then I began to sell the Daily Boost 5 days a week as a membership platform. And that led to raving fans, because people come in, they want to know more about you. So my model was that. It was bring people in the door. I ran membership first, which is now just really, it's becoming popular now, but still it's only about 13% of the population that will actually pay for a podcast. So it's relatively small. But because they like you and because they can learn from you, then I would come up with courses, which are so popular. I've been doing courses since 2007. Then that leads into coaching and consulting, and that leads in speaking. I've been to Australia and back speaking. And so people, once they get to know how you think, they want more from you, which is always a reward. So that's the biggest pay model there. The biggest pay model in any information marketing world, which is what we do, podcasting, call it what it is, it's still information marketing. You're getting information out there. If you curate that information properly, because nobody has any time anymore, they need it curated so it can get them the result they want, and I can provide that curated level of information, then they will pay me for that. So that's one level that I do. The better way of doing a podcast is, and it's, I think, the only way for almost every podcast right now, and the future of podcasting is advertising. It's going that way. And that's why we're doing more and more ads these days. And so we monetize on the Daily Boost on that side using Spotify's platform and a few others to do that. But you have to have a lot of downloads to get to that. So you got to build that engagement. You got to build the audience before the ads will pay for themselves. But for anybody who's starting a podcast, like for you, for what you do, I don't know what you do and how your business operates, but what I know is this: there is a percentage of your audience that will need more information on what you offer, and will want to engage you at some level, some at a very high level. And at some point, you just let them know how they can do that. And some of them will do that. About 3% of your audience will actually engage you at a very high level. So generally speaking, that's what I do. We sometimes we'll get projects. Somebody will call me and say, hey, can you help me launch a podcast? And I have a unique advantage because I can very quickly help them launch a podcast. I don't do it routinely. I charge a lot for it. But I can also put them on my podcast, promote their podcast, and send a ton of people over to them and get their podcast launched. So sometimes I will do that, probably 3 or 4 times a year. I don't do it often. So that's kind of what I do. It's just a variation of that across the board.
You're saying that now advertising is becoming a much bigger part than it was before.
Oh, yeah.
So how has it changed the podcast since when you started? And how has it been developing now, the podcast industry? It's
becoming an industry, for the most part. When I started, it wasn't one. There were like 5,000 podcasts in the world when I started. Now there's 4 million. And, when I started before iTunes had podcasts. And they're still they're not the big dog anymore. They're about a third of all podcasts now. Spotify has another third, and Google Podcasts has another third. No, I'm sorry, that's a lie. Don't lie. YouTube has a third of the podcast, and they're not podcasts, right? So as YouTube is a whole different platform, it's not an RSS feed. So it has become an industry, and this has really taken off. I'm going to say in the last 5 years. I mean, we're now over $1 billion in ad revenue per year. That's tiny by, advertising standards, but for the podcast industry, it's a real milestone. So the big boys have come. I've said this for years, they're coming. iHeart and Spotify and all those guys, they're big. And whenever you have something like this, where you have content out there that people are listening to, you're attracting ears to the podcast. Advertisers want those ears. They start tossing dollars on the table, and here we go. And the industry is building. So I think it has a way to go. It's attribution about how a podcast is actually listened to. We don't really know in many cases who listens to a podcast. We don't even know who downloads it for sure. They just go to iTunes and get it, and they download it. And we don't know who downloaded it, and we don't know who listened to it. That's going to change. A streaming podcast now has attribution to it. Meaning that we can tell who's listening. We can serve ads to that, just like Facebook does. That's being fought by some of the more independent podcasters right now because they think it shouldn't happen. It's going to happen. There's no way to stop it because there's too much money in it. There's billions of dollars coming down the pike, and any smart podcaster who wants to get part of the $100 million Joe Rogan train, among others, is going to recognize that advertising is going to be there. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people.
So how do you see it developing in the future?
Podcasting, I think, has two main issues to it that are stopping it. One is, I mentioned, attribution. Attribution meaning we don't know who listens. Combined with attribution, you got the agencies coming in to buy stuff, and they can't easily place ads on a podcast. Not yet. If you want to do radio or TV, you could, sit down at your desk and probably, if you have the contacts, if you know who to do it and have the right systems, you could place ads across radio stations across the world at a push of a button. Done. It just happens. You can't do that on podcasts yet. So I think, the attribution and the distribution part of podcasting is coming. They have to figure that out. So I see that once that happens, it's just the floodgates are going to open because it's going to make accessibility to podcasts from an advertising standpoint really, really easy. The harder part of podcasting right now is discovery. It's being found. And you're going to find that with the new podcast that you have. It's getting people to discover your podcast. That's really the first thing. And then the second thing is to get them to stay. A lot of people come to me and they say, hey, I follow these launch models of podcasts that everybody sells. I'm going to go out and do my podcast that, John Lee Dumas and these other people say to do. And I launched it and I got going and I got traction and Apple gave me some big promotion and then everybody stopped listening. I said, yeah, because you had a bad podcast. Nobody wanted it. And you get pretty much one shot, man. You might get 30 seconds. So the discovery of it is you got to make a podcast. You got to get people to find you. And then when they find you, give them what they expected. And that's it. And once discovery gets there, that solves because as a publisher, if I get more discovery, then when an advertiser calls me, like one did yesterday, I can tell them exactly how many downloads I can give them. And I charge per 1,000. So I make more money depending on downloads. We run ads right now for podcasts. We have one yesterday and one today. And I'll give them promo, Jordan Harbinger Show and the Something You Should Know podcast. They pay me to send my audience to them because they grow their audience. And the more they grow, the more they can charge for advertising. That's where it's going.
Amazing.
And sadly, I mean, just a kind of and this may, I think independent podcasters, small niche podcasters are always going to be there. There's a real need for that, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's like independent film. You're going to have the Spider-Man from Marvel out there blowing up the theaters, and then you're going to have the little independent films out there as well. And fair, not even going to go there. But you're going to have the smaller podcasters around, but the big guys are coming. You can't stop it. It's worldwide. It's coming. The big companies are here, and accept it and go with the ride, and you'll do okay. And but like I said, you don't have to have advertising to make money. You can do it other ways as well. Are you trying to make money on your podcast?
I'm just trying to make a good podcast, have interesting conversations and learn myself, and also explore new ways of helping customers, because I think that education is changing quite a lot. Students can access information online. So I think, I love listening to podcasts myself. So I'm interested to develop a podcast and to help other people to learn as well.
I use them a lot. I'm picky. I'm really picky at what I listen to. It's got to be done really well. It's got to give me exactly what I need at the time for me to invest my time in it. I mentioned the Jordan Harbinger show. He's good. I mean, he's a smart podcast, and his shows are sometimes an hour and a half long. And he's got 11 million downloads per show. And he's got does 7-figure deals. He's doing well, but he does a great show. And so while he's got the business model behind it, the information he extracts is fantastic because he prepares, he interviews well, he gets great guests. And that's the biggest thing. See, from my standpoint, I'm pretty picky about that. If you're going to do a podcast, that I'm really interested in, I want a really good guest who knows their stuff, and I want you to be able to extract that information from them. If you do that, you'll do really, really well, and you'll achieve all your goals. That's all you have to do with that. And I'm trying to, the best I can, I hope I'm giving you deep information here for the part of your audience that will want this and for you to learn as well. One last thing on that is there's an interesting thing. This is more psychological than anything. And you got to understand that you need to be a really strong host as a podcast host, meaning it's okay for you to learn, but ultimately what you're doing is you're guiding the people listening to your podcast to learn what you kind of already know, what you've already discovered, and you're going to learn more along the way. So you are part of their tribe, but you're actually the leader of the tribe because you host the podcast. So it's foundational in being able to make the show work, because when you approach the show, you can approach it one of two ways. You can approach it at, hey, let's get together and talk about stuff and learn together. While I learn, you're going to learn. That's great. It sounds fantastic. But people don't do that. People follow leaders. So when you show up and you've already established yourself as a leader of getting this information, and you found something they really need to hear, and you're going to explore this together and see what we can all learn together, boom, winner, winner, as they say. So that's key. And people, they want curation and they want leadership and they want you to take them to the promised land. And yet they want to think like me. I think, even though I'm a whole lot older than you and I think a lot alike, and you and I probably sit down and have a great dinner together. And yet at the same time, you know full well that I'm going to teach you stuff, and let's go. And that's what you need to get with your audience. So be that leader, step into it. Most podcasts that fail, they will fail because they want to be two friends talking across the kitchen table. It's not going to work. Even the ones that do that, the ones that do it, there's somebody I saw the other day making like $60 million to do their podcast. And I checked out the podcast and I didn't like it. It wasn't my thing, but I recognized the format in it. It didn't seem like there was a format, but they were leading this show. They were taking people through it and they were doing what they're supposed to be doing. People expect that. So if I could give anybody any advice of running a podcast, you decide what the audience is going to get. You become the leader. You take them on a journey and you deliver what you want them to get, and they will appreciate you for it.
So before you mentioned about one of the most important parts is discovery in the podcast. How do you succeed in discovery?
Well, I think the first way to do that is to do a good podcast, and when you put your podcast up on wherever you put it up, and you write your description and you write your title and you write your title of your shows and all that stuff, that's a search engine. People forget about that. So not only do you have the search engine within all the different platforms now, where people will search for things, and it's a very literal search engine. It's not very fancy. It's very literal. So people looking for a certain thing will find you. Number one, get that stuff right. And then, you want to do kind of the first glance search engine, which is the people one, which means that when people find your podcast by chance, they see the name, it makes sense. They see the description, it makes sense. They see the titles, it makes sense. It resonates with them right away, and they start to listen. So that's the first thing. You got to have that basic meta stuff in there to be able to get them to really understand what's going on. And remember, I can tell you, I can change the title of my podcast and increase my downloads by 10,000. Just changing a title. Got to get bored with it because it's like the same 20 titles. People look for the same thing. So number one in discovery is all that stuff. Get it right so people know exactly who you are. Number two, deliver on your promise. Whatever you said you're going to do, deliver on it. For me, it's sometimes difficult because my daily boost, my positivity, things like that, that's really kind of, not everybody's going to take what I do in my style and think it's motivating to them. It's not going to happen. And I know that. And so I'm going to lose some people, but I'm going to keep a lot more than I lose. So that's the first thing. Get a good show, because what happens is, what do? They share the show. So the next thing is to ask them to share the show, to ask them to review it, to ask them to tell their friends, to ask them to post to Facebook, to send them an email, to send them a link, make a copy, take a screenshot on your phone and share it on your Facebook profile, and start doing that. And what does that do? It attracts people in to try the show. And if they like it, they'll do the same. So wash, rinse, and repeat. Once you get there, then you can move it into external. You can move into running ads if you wanted to. You got to have money to do that. One of the places people go pretty fast is they go to YouTube. It's got a third of podcasts are listened to on YouTube. Kind of amazing to me, but it's searchable. It's got a great search engine, right? And so you can go into, you can take your podcast and make it a video on YouTube. A lot of the podcasts now just have a graphic and just audio. But you do that on YouTube, you're going to find more people because the search engine is better. Those are the basic ways. Beyond that, you start advertising and you start promoting, you start partnering with people. But ultimately, if you don't deliver on your promise, you're not going to grow anyway. So that's the first step.
So what do you think right now, if someone's looking to start a podcast, do you see any kind of opportunities for people to start new podcasts, or do you think it's already kind of crowded?
Well, listen, crowded's not bad. Crowded's good. You know, people run from crowded. Oh, I can't do it. It's crowded. They are good because that just means there are a lot of podcasts, which means there are a lot of people listening to them. A lot of people looking for it. It's huge. I mean, and the podcast listener numbers go up every year. We're not at anywhere near what radio is yet. We're not anywhere near what TV is yet. It's not there. Streaming still hasn't taken off. It's getting there. But so, and where's the opportunity? The opportunity is podcasting by and large is niched. Very few general interest podcasts exist. I'm more general interest than most in the motivation category. And I don't suggest that for anybody. It's a hard place to go. So if you specifically know what you're talking about and who you're talking to, go find those people, figure out where they are and go find them. And when you find those people, they're going to listen. That's the opportunity. The niche is right there. Now, you know, if you want to do a big old podcast and, you know, be a Joe Rogan, general interest kind of guy, 4-hour shows, that kind of thing, you can do that. Also, the other thing is to choose your category. There's certain podcast categories that do really, really well. I'm in education. It's a pretty good category. It's not the best. Self-improvement is smaller. I know the numbers. I've been doing this 15 years. I know exactly how many downloads I can expect. It's not comedy. It's not, you know, true life crime. It's none of that stuff. So where it's going is like anything else. It's like watching a Hollywood movie. Figure out what niche, what people want to know about, and then put that in front of them to find it, and you'll be just fine. Go too broad, you're going to fight it every step of the way. I wouldn't recommend that to anybody.
So if someone is looking to start a podcast and they've found their niche, what advice would you give to them to start? I know you've shared a lot of useful information. Do you have anything else to share to them?
Yeah, probably start. That's probably the biggest niche. I can tell you this, most people are going to get caught up in the tech. They're going to get caught up in the creative. Don't do that. Podcasts are easier than ever to do. When I started, we had to do everything manually. Now it's, you know, they're hosting services that kind of do it all for you. Just to kind of embrace that. Don't get caught up in it. And don't get caught up in the microphones and stuff like that. You got to deliver good quality now. You got to do a good show. You got to have good equipment now because competition is huge. So what I would say is this, however you get it done, decide what it's going to be and get it started and keep it. It's going to be, nobody's going to listen when you start anyway. It's going to be tiny. Yours is pretty tiny, I would guess. I don't know how many downloads you have, but it's not very many. But do you know how many you have now?
Yeah, it's about 400 so far out of 2 episodes.
All right, cool. Well, it's not bad. The average podcast per episode has 141. So you're a little bit ahead of the average, aren't you? Probably because you're niched. So my thing about people, and I can always tell them, go ahead and just start the podcast and do 25 or 30. Actually, in all honesty, I started with a 60-second podcast, 5 days a week. That's what I started with. And within a month, I said, well, let's do a 30-minute weekend show. And I went to the weekend show. And that was probably halfway through the year. And I did the podcast. And when I got to the end of the year, I looked back on what I had done. And while I liked it, I said, that kind of sucky, honestly. And so those original 26 podcasts are, they're in the archive and they were pulled and nobody ever heard them again. And I started again because now I had an idea. You're not going to be good till you get to be 25 or 30 podcasts in. The original Daily Boost had, we actually launched the show in October of 2005. And I didn't like it. But I did it every day for, 6 or 7 weeks. And when I say launch it, I actually never published it. I just did it. And I didn't like it, so I stopped. And I rejiggered the show and I came back and I launched it again. And when I did, it came back as a different feeling, a different format, and it stuck. It's been here ever since. So you start, and within 25, 30, 40 episodes, you'll finally get your groove on it. That's going to make all the difference in the world. Most podcasts, by the way, don't make it to 2 or 3 episodes. They fail. In fact, of the 4 million podcasts out there, it's only about 400,000 that actually produce even a weekly podcast. It's very tiny. So if you have a good niche and you're willing to do a good show and you're willing to be consistent, you can succeed because most people aren't doing that. And remember, every podcast that has ever been out since 2004 that still has an RSS feed is still available to the public. And I don't think that should be. I think if it's 15 years old and it's dead, it should go away. But we haven't talked Apple into doing that yet.
Do you have any advice for me from this conversation so far, or this podcast, about how it could be better?
Okay, so here we go. You're following the bouncing Scott here. You're kind of letting me go, and you're really trusting I'm going to give you something that's going to be interesting. So what I would advise you to do is, before you ever get me on the phone, is you let me know exactly what you want to accomplish. Because until I got on with you today on Zoom, I didn't know that we were talking about podcasting. And had I known that, that would have helped me a little bit, right? And then I probably could have given you some ideas about where to take it. And then you could have generated not necessarily questions, but certainly this is the kind of the path we want to follow here. That would have kept me on path with you. And then you would have been able to guide it more. And then we would have been much more. In fact, honestly, as I listen right now, I'm talking a little longer than I like to, but I'm trying to give you a lot of information. Had I known a little in advance, I could have edited this down and got more information in for you. So that's first thing. The second thing is, are you going to introduce the show?
Yeah, so I'll do an introduction before and add it on later.
Okay. So when we got on the call today, and I'm just being, frank with you, you didn't say that. Yeah. You just kind of, okay, let's start recording, and you started talking. So you didn't set the frame for me about where to go. Now, I'll tell you what you're setting up for. This is something I tell people all the time. When you interview somebody on the phone or on the Zoom or whatever on your podcast, you're the host and you're the boss and you're in charge. This is your show. But I want to be good. And I want to make sure that I get good stuff for having done this show. In other words, people look at me and say, man, he knows his stuff. That's what I want. And so if I'm going to make sure you get that, I'm going to put that in there, and that's me being a good guy. But say I want to take control over your show. It would take me nothing to take control over your show and to start. And I've done it a couple times. I've fed questions back to you. If I really wanted to, I could own your show. Any good media trained guest will do that. And that's why I say you have to own your show. You have to introduce it strongly, let them know the expectation, and then you set the tone and you go for it. So if you listen back to this interview and listen back to the ones you've done, you'll see I'll use a word. I hope it's okay. And it's your personality mostly. Your vocal style is a little timid, a little exploratory. That's probably just who you are, but it's not driving a mission to go someplace. So if I'm going to stop there. I don't want to overcoach you on it, but basically it comes down to you driving the machine, doesn't it? That's what it comes down to.
Sure.
And you're doing a great job. I mean, you're getting me where I need to go, and I appreciate you doing that. I'm just saying, not everybody's going to do this to you. If you get somebody who doesn't have answers for you by chance, you're going to struggle with your podcast. It's going to get to be a boring show really fast. And one piece of advice before I just let you have more is, if you ever get anybody who is not delivering the content that your audience needs, you could be nice and finish the interview, but don't publish it. Or you can stop the interview and say, listen, we need to start this again. And if they don't do it, if they don't get you what you need, cancel it. Don't put that show out there, because that's going to come back on you. Back to you owning the product, right? Owning the show.
Yeah, so because you're such a great podcaster, I feel like I don't want to interrupt you when you're speaking. Do you think I should just be interrupting you whilst you're speaking?
Yeah, it's okay. So you can slice and dice it. But yeah, absolutely. You because one thing, we talk about engagement early in the podcast and keeping people engaged. Well, keeping people engaged is you chopping things up and moving things forward. If you watch any newscast, you'll see a newscaster will do that. And sometimes they get very abrupt. Now, I will tell you, as a media guy, you got to be really good to stop me. Usually I'll play by the rules, and most guests will that are media trained. They'll play by the rules because they want to come back to the show. They want to give you the information. Nobody wants to hurt you. Some do. Some people have an agenda to get out. And if you're not really aggressive with them, they're not going to stop. So yeah, you interrupt. But like we're on Zoom right now, I can see you. And so all you have to do even is to say, just hold your hand up and just let me know you want to say something, like, he's got an idea. You engage me when we're on video and I'll stop. But yeah, absolutely. You want to get in there and guide the conversation. I would never. Yeah, I would probably shoot for 30, 40-second answers at the most. at the most. But most podcasters, I've just, having done this, if I'm on with somebody who's had relatively little experience, if I stop after 30 seconds, they usually don't know what to say. And so I go and I just fill in all the blanks and do that. If I'm on with somebody really experienced, I don't have to do that. They will guide me every step of the way. So yes, absolutely do that. That's good interviewing.
I have many questions that I wanted to ask. So if you were going to stop, I would have many more questions to keep asking. Everything you're saying is interesting.
Actually, let me call something out. Look at what you just did. You just went in there. You tried to get my attention, but look what I'm doing to you.
Yeah, I mean, in that situation, it's okay, but it's not a problem to do that.
Well, you know what radio people do.
Yeah,
they mute you. And what happens is actually radio telephone systems like talk radio, you can set it so that if somebody is babbling, when the host starts to talk, it mutes the caller. And you know what they do when a caller doesn't go the direction they want to go? They just hang up on them and they disappear and they move on with the show. So when we started talking, you never want two-way talk on top of each other. You never, ever, ever want that. But I did it purposely because what happened was we were talking, you naturally responded by coming back to me stronger. And I noticed you coming back to me stronger. So what I did was I kept pushing back and pushing back and pushing back and pushing back, and you weren't giving up. And I just did not cede that territory for you. So at that point, it becomes, okay, who's going to win the battle here? Who maintains control? Now, we're in an interesting situation right now because, in a sense, in terms of teaching podcasting, you've already ceded that territory to me. And so you're listening to me. But what you did was cool, and you should do more of that. Absolutely take control of it. Don't let anybody, and this is not just a podcast, this is anybody you're ever talking to, because the person who has the knowledge, who has the authority, will walk right on top of you if you give them a chance to. If you want to do a speed round, if you've got questions and you want a 15 or 20 second answer to everything, I'll keep myself reeled in like that so I can give you all the information you need. Do you have anything else you want to talk about?
Basically, I wanted to ask you, Scott, what are your future plans for the podcast and how do you see it developing in the future?
I do what I do. That's my plan. And ultimately, I have waited a long time for the industry to kind of catch up. And I do want to increase the income, increase the reach, and I want to write the book and things like that. I've spent 15 years essentially creating content to write books and kind of shift off more into that world. That's coming, and it's coming this year. That's where I'm heading with it. So we'll stop there, but I have one more add to it. I'm building a platform, and the platform is, right now I could probably sell 20,000 books on my platform. There's not a publisher in the world who wouldn't take me on because I could sell 20,000 books with them doing nothing. So I'm building a platform. So what's next is solidify a platform and then go.
So I really appreciate you having the time for the chat, and it's always great to talk to you. Do you have anything else you'd like to share or anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, you got so lucky. You got me on a Zoom call at 7 a.m. in the morning, my time. Now, fortunately, I get up and get going early anyway because I like to do this stuff. But, if we stay on the podcast thing, ultimately what happens with the podcast, back to the intimacy thing. If you have a message to share, if you have a message you can help with people, you can educate them, then think about who they are and think about how they hear that and deliver that to them directly. And don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid. Just get in there and just say, this is what we do, and we're going to teach you. If you have that dream, do it. Don't worry about the money. You've got to build the foundation first. Let all the surrounding business part of it follow you, unless you're much more, sophisticated than that. You're down the road a little further. But do it until you get really good at it. And like I say, you get so good at it, people can't not pay attention to you. Just go do your thing. But be realistic with the world, too. I mean, we've talked a ton about that stuff. I mean, about advertising and about engagement and all. You can do it your way all you want to, but the audience is paying attention to you. And if they don't pay attention, it's because you're not doing what they want. So the trick is to find what you want to do that makes you happy and joyful and deliver it in a way that you really, really get some fire out of it, and yet they like it too. That's the trick. If you do that, you'll nail it.
That's awesome, Scott. I really appreciate it. So if people are interested to find out more, they can search on the podcast, The Daily Boost, and also your website.
Yeah. So my main website is motivation2move.com. You can see it's a pretty basic site, but you can see stuff about me there. And if you go to pretty much anywhere, I think we're on all the major platforms. So search Daily Boost, Scott, Daily Boost Motivation. It'll probably come up under Daily Boost anyway. And you'll find it. Pretty easy to find.
So thank you very much to Scott Smith for that amazing podcast. It's amazing to get feedback from people who are experts in what they do, and the only way to get better and really good is just to keep going and keep making podcasts. So thank you very much. And if you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe here and on our YouTube channel, and we have some great episodes lined up, so check it out in the next episodes.